a lot of things happening in the world. The inflation continues to soar.
Yeah.
Now there is actual military conflict. Again, we don't need to get into a political debate, although you're welcome to if you would like to, by all means. But I mean, certainly Joe Biden a couple of weeks ago was saying, hey, you know, we got inflation under control. Then it was just Putin's fault. Then it's like, hey, there's going to be problems with the food supply. You're on your own. And, you know, in this environment, which I hear on the physical level, people are buying more silver than ever. We're seeing this with the price. Well, hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you for Arcadia Economics. It's Tuesday, March 29th, 2022, almost rounding out the first quarter of a wild year so far. And I am fortunate to be joined by one of the silver experts on the planet, Jorge Ramiro Monroy of Reyna Silver. And I guess maybe this isn't fair to tag this along, but it's just so cool that, you know, he is partners with Dr. Peter McGaugh, widely recognized, if not the top expert if you're looking for silver in Mexico. Although, Jorge, I know you've studied under the man, you've found silver projects with the man. Maybe one day you will surpass Sensei, who knows? But in either case, a great body of knowledge that you have with you, and it's great to have you back on the show. It's been too long, but welcome on in. And how are you today?
I'm doing great, and really great to see you again, Chris. It's been a couple of months since we had a chance to speak, and I always love seeing you in Mexico. A beautiful background behind you, and you know, especially that part of Mexico where you are is you know, that's oftentimes when we do site visits to different mining projects, that's where we land in Mazatlan, Mexico. And it's a pretty fascinating, geologically fascinating part of the world. That's kind of where the you know, the big trend of big silver, gold, and copper deposits starts, going all the way from Mazatlan all the way to Chihuahua. So I've done that trip by road many times. You know, coming from Canada or from Mexico City, landing in Mazatlan, and then going, and you know, it just reminds you of the thing that I'm always sort of all inspired by is almost you know, you stop every few kilometers, and when you're going with the geologist, you know, they'll be telling you, you know, there's that Spanish working over there, you know, that Spanish working over there. It really is, for whatever reason, geologically, the host of some of the biggest silver, gold, and copper deposits in the world, and what looks like still a lot to be found as well. So it's great to see you there, and also congratulate you on being able to roll your R's.
Well, I have been practicing. I took a little sip of water before we started here, and yeah, it's funny for the people who caught last night's call, which was from Silverfest, where you and a few others talked about, you know, if you were out looking for silver on planet Earth, whether, you know, you want to go find it on your own, or if you're saying, hey, I want silver companies that have exposure, what are some of the regions you want to target? We talked about this region here down to Tepic, Sierra Madre, and, you know, it's been interesting seeing a lot of Mexico where, you know, it wasn't as if when I came here, I knew, well, this is where I'm going to go and stay, you know, and I've been finding out, similar to how Cleveland is different than San Diego. There's different neighborhoods, different cultures. And, but it's interesting, maybe 20 years from now, you know, having had that experience and seen these places, who knows how that will pay off. So it's good to be here in Mexico, feeling close to silver, because even as there's a lot of things positive happening in the silver world, today the price is not one of them.
Yeah.
As you can see here on the Kitco chart. And on a small side note, Jorge, I had a critic the other day on Twitter. He was saying, you know, love the show, but you got to get a more professional charting service, which I get on one hand in my defense here. I mean, I'm not a technical chartist. And with Kitco, I just so love the multicolor 3 days. It's just, you got blue, you got red, you got green. And Jorge, maybe we'll make our own with different colors that will have 4 days. You know, we could add another color just to spice things up. But what would you say here? I mean, in the couple months
Yeah.
since we've talked, where a lot of things happening in the world. The inflation continues to soar.
Yeah.
Now there is actual military conflict. Again, we don't need to get into a political debate, although you're welcome to if you would like to, by all means. But I mean, certainly Joe Biden a couple of weeks ago was saying, hey, you know, we got inflation under control. Then it was just Putin's fault. Then it's like, hey, there's going to be problems with the food supply. You're on your own. And, you know, in this environment, which I hear on the physical level, people are buying more silver than ever. We're seeing this with the price. So why don't you share any thoughts from there and we'll dig in.
Yeah, no, it's a lot there to unpack, Chris. And, you know, I think the first thing that I would say is, I think for all of us who are believers in silver, you know, we all expect silver to be higher than it is now. I think we all understand that silver is underpriced. I think we all understand that silver is manipulated. And, you know, you know, I think, you know, I watched your show religiously, so I know you have discussed ad nauseum the, you know, inflation. And, you know, a couple of things that I've been looking at, Chris, on in terms of, you know, like the inflation is, you know, and this I feel does not get this discussed enough in the sort of mainstream media, and it's really worth taking a look and unpacking. And, you know, it is everything around food supply. We understand, you know, the dynamics with the supply chain, but, you know, I think on the potash, on the fertilizer side, you know, potash, as you know, it's one of the biggest producers is Russia and Ukraine as well. Ukraine is also a big agricultural, you know, producer. And I just from reading the newspapers, you know, for those of you who don't know, I'm based in Hong Kong at the moment. I'm in North America, but generally speaking, I'm based in Hong Kong. So I'm constantly browsing through the news in you know, in Asia, and not a day goes by where there's not an article talking about you know, comments from the Chinese and from the Indian government talking about self-sufficiency in food supply. Those guys are generally worried. And, you know, for those of you who had a chance to go to the Asian cities, whether it's in China or in India, you know, those populations are, you know, orders of magnitude to what we have in the US. We have, you know, when you go to China, you know, you go from city to city, and, you know, it's a city that you've never heard of, and they call it a small city, and there'll be like 10 million people, you know, and it's a city that just came from nowhere. You know, that whole process of urbanization in both in China and India, if you ever have a chance to look at the data, even though both economies have slowed down, the pace of urbanization is still going up tremendously. And if you think about it, the two of the main fuels for that urbanization is metals and protein, you know, higher quality foods. So one of the things that we've studied over the last years, when these Chinese cities just you know, spring out of nowhere, basically what's happening is, you know, people who used to be living a farming-based life in China, all of a sudden move to the cities, get, you know, a job at a factory or something like that, and then all of a sudden, for the first time, they buy an apartment. For the first time, they buy a refrigerator. For the first time, they buy a car. And, you know, with this higher income, they're also now consuming a lot more, you know, higher protein content foods, which also require a lot more, you know, fertilizer and normal production, instead of just eating, you know, meat maybe once a week. Now it's every day, maybe 2-3 times a day. So it's really beyond, you know, from a Western point of view, you know, we're just looking at about the prices, because we're already at the pinnacle of what somebody could eat. You know, if anything, we could do with less. But, you know, in the developing world, you know, aspirationally, you know, as part of that growth, you know, food has a more vital and immediate role. So that's one thing that needs to be taken into account. And again, we all see the inflation data, and I don't think any of us believes that. I think before, sort of anecdotal as to whether you believe it or not. But now, you're living a day to day. You're paying, when you go to the grocery store, when you go to the restaurant, when you go to the gas station. It's now, I think, forefront on everybody's mind. So I bring these points because I think what we're going through is quite significant. I don't know where this is leading to, but I do think it's now imperative to really consider, where you're keeping gold and silver. It really becomes, a defensive measure and a way to keep, to keep your wealth from evaporating. So those are some of the things that I've been looking at. Obviously, I've been looking at the same charts that you've all been looking at with inflation and the effect that just holding cash has on if we have this level of inflation for the next 5 years, even just on the official numbers, your cash is going to go down 40-50%. So those are some of the things that I'm been thinking about. And of course, in our case, very much focused on finding silver on the ground, around some of the biggest historic districts in Mexico. And, if you think about it, it's also not a bad place to have your wealth on a silver that's on the ground, and you're not necessarily extracting it now at a time where it's, significantly undervalued.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And leads, of course, to the next question that I know you get a lot. I know is on the minds of people who are watching, because they certainly ask me, whether emails, comments, it's then in the face of all this, even we have gold above 1900, yet here silver is still sitting, getting whacked around. And I think people wonder, all right, well, we get it, it's manipulated, but when is the benefit going to kick in? Which is a very fair question. And certainly, after seeing like the war escalate and silver still get pummeled, I was like, geez, how long can this go on for? But that's one of the reasons I'm glad you're here, because perhaps you could speak, at least, while there's not, it's hard to know the exact break point from a silver mining perspective. Now, you're not in production yet, but for companies that are producing silver, especially a lot of them, the non-primary silver miners, their lumber costs are going up, their food costs, their insurance, the costs of everything are going up. So it's like, if there was any incentive for an entrepreneur to start a new company, that's going down. Profit margins are going down, which you would think at some point, we've already been running deficits. Now, maybe that's more of a macro factor, but anything you could touch on there with your experience, I think would be helpful for people.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I get it. It's really frustrating. Like I said, I guess we're into close to 2 years. Actually, yeah, just about 2 years since, we all thought, silver is really going to take off. I mean, it did have a massive move, actually right around this time 2 years ago, if you remember, when it went from $13 to almost 30. Well, actually, we did touch 30. So that already is a significant move. The prices of silver now are, while they're not as high as we would like them, they're actually very healthy for the mining companies. It does allow them to produce at a healthy margin. What you say is right. The inputs are going to start increasing. So, it will inevitably become more expensive to mine, but still a very healthy margin. And, I've been actually thinking about this, and I was with some investors yesterday who are quite a bit more experienced with me on the silver market. And we were having it's a group of German investors, and we were discussing a little bit about this. And one of them said something that really caught my mind. And he said, look, the reality is none of us knows what's going to happen. There is absolutely no way. And the one thing you have to remember is, we all keep thinking about drawing parallels to, 1972 or parallels to, the 2000 crash or the 2008 crash and the effect. And he was saying to me, look, one thing that I've learned is really nobody knows what's going to happen. No market is always identical. And really the only thing you can do is, look for assets that are undervalued and just understanding, what you have at any given moment. Can you how can you have the opportunity to to move your money where you think there is more value and more upside. So I thought that was a very good comment, and I think from that prism, from that perspective, silver is undoubtedly one of the commodities that still I think all of us can agree it's undervalued. And then the big question becomes, when is it going to really take off? And the answer is, none of us really knows. But the one thing I can tell you, Chris, is every day that goes by, more and more, things come in favor of silver. Inflation, political risk, as you discussed, increase in industrial applications. Almost on every front, the thesis just becomes stronger and stronger. So it really just becomes then an exercise in patience and in really thinking about where else can I put my money that's better than precious metals. And I think we would all struggle to find that at the moment. Of course, there's other commodities that are looking really good, nickel, copper, but those have also had very significant movements in the last little bit.
Yeah, I think that's a great point you mentioned, where certainly it's not an easy set of choices for the average person yet. The stock market, are they going to keep pumping it higher? It's amazing. Interest rates are spiking and the stock market just keeps soaring, yet, it's like, where else do you put it? And, fortunately, there are some boundaries now when I think of what could ultimately happen. I don't know, maybe this goes on 5 or 10 years. You keep depleting supply, not bringing more online, and eventually there's some sort of more extreme shortage. Although you also mentioned the political things, which is kind of what I've always imagined is the more likely route, where at the end of the day, the U.S. is running a Ponzi scheme in the dollar reserve. I think it was close to going off the tracks in 1980, perhaps when the U.S. was getting downgraded in 2011 and gold was soaring to 1900 then. Maybe it was close to going off the tracks. But now we have a little bit of a floor set here. Give me a second. I'm going to put this. So I guess we'll have Russian sound with English captions, but at least so you can hear. This was pretty interesting. Russia president predicting countries will start converting their paper and electronic assets into real reserves of raw materials like land, food, and gold. And as we go through this, Jorge, I think for people watching at home, this will tie together how the inflation, how a potential food shortage, how it's all connected, because what Biden has not answered, except for saying it's Putin's fault, is that, they do have a lot of these resources that other people need. The Europeans are already starting to cave on this a little bit. So let's take a listen to what...
Повторю, серьезный удар нанесен по всей глобальной экономике и торговле, по доверию и к американскому доллару как основной резервной валюте. Так, нелегитимные действия по заморозке части валютных резервов Банка России подводят черту под надежностью так называемых первоклассных активов. По факту и США, и ЕС объявили самый настоящий дефолт по своим обязательствам перед Россией. Теперь каждый знает, что финансовые резервы могут быть попросту украдены. И видя это, многие страны уже в ближайшее время могут начать, уверен, так и будет происходить, конвертировать свои бумажные и цифровые накопления в настоящие резервы в виде сырьевых товаров, земли, продовольствия, золота, других реальных активов.
Now, Jorge, we don't need to get into the dynamics of the war that's going on, but just what he says economically makes more sense than what Joe Biden says economically, and he's got the goods. He's taking gold. The U.S. has paper, and they've just set a floor under the gold price. What's your thoughts on that one?
No, I mean, I'm watching all of this very carefully, Chris, and a few things that really I wasn't 100% aware of was I didn't know Russia is, something like 40% of the palladium comes from Russia. Obviously, we all know about nickel, but Russia also a top producing of copper. I forget if definitely top 5 or top 10.
I believe they're top 5 or 6 in silver as well.
Yeah, and the other thing that we all have heard in the news about Europe's overall dependency on natural gas. I think like you said, taking away all the politics aside, just purely on understanding the dynamics of all these commodities. I think it's to be questioned as to whether sanctioning Russia. Yes, of course, you're crippling their economy, but you're also crippling the world economy. And at the end of the day, it's fair to ask to what extent you're affecting and putting at risk the supremacy of the U.S. dollar. I think that's there's a few definitely Russia has a lot of cards that they can play. They've now trying to affect those negotiations with Iran on oil and gas. Basically, we think about all the alternatives that the West is looking for oil and gas. Venezuela, Iran, these are all countries that are very much in the political sphere of Russia, and that's just not a good position to be in. And so I think personally, I think it's however these rolls are wrong, I don't think it's going to be the final nail on the U.S. dollar. I don't think that's imminent, but I think it does all of a sudden. You're playing with fire for sure. Because I think if Russia had a more definitive victory in Ukraine, where they would have taken it over in a couple of days and had more cards to, and what happens if you embolden China, then things are not looking great for the U.S. dollar. But just purely on the restriction on commodities, I think that the political implications are going to be enormous. I just don't think the West has a lot of tolerance for inflation. Whereas I think China and Russia, you have to remember, these are people who anybody who's my age or older, grew up with with a bag of rice a week, and those guys have a lot more tolerance for suffering than we do as Westerners. So I think the political implications are pretty big. I think the events of the last few weeks are not great for the position of the U.S. dollar. I think it's still some runway to go, but again, you're now really playing with fire, and then also opening the door for I actually don't think this is the end of the story. I think you've opened the Pandora's box for a lot of more trouble. What happens if all of a sudden Iran comes up and tests a nuclear weapon? What happens if China decides to invade Taiwan? These are some serious political possibilities that we didn't really think they were immediate, and I think now they're at our forefront.
Yeah, and they're just piling on, and I agree with what you said. Does that mean something's going to happen tomorrow? No. And someone probably spends too much time thinking about it. It is a confusing dynamic where on one hand, all the fundamentals suggest this. On the other hand, we're probably seeing, at least from my studies, the most manipulated asset market in history, because I think that covers up so much government crime. Yet, it's kind of like the mortgage bubble. You didn't know when it was going to go, but you could see that in advance. And here, an article I had by Tom Luongo talking about, I don't think everyone has yet caught the significance of Russia announcing they're putting a floor under the price of gold. But to be clear, Russia just broke the gold suppression scheme. So I think in due time, Tom will be right, because one thing I'd like to point out, I know people heard the news and were excited. Now, 5,000 rubles, they didn't say they're going out and paying $2,500 an ounce for gold. It comes out to about a $1,600 floor, yet tying together all those things you mentioned earlier, where before, if people wanted wheat or the palladium or these things from Russia, they were sending dollars through the SWIFT system. Now, if you either have rubles, which Joe Biden is trying to stiff arm everyone on the globe to not use. So if they want these things, if some people want to continue eating food, they're going to need rubles or gold.
Yeah.
How that plays out in the silver market, we'll see. But it's like, all right, now you just have a new source of demand. If people want food,
yeah,
they have to play with that set of rules. So more demand for gold, less demand for dollars in an already shaky system. When the exact break point will be, we shall see. But those are some of the factors going on there. And actually, one last thing, you can feel free to comment on this or not if you'd like. Just again, showing my concern of what's happening here. We have over the weekend, Biden says Putin cannot remain in power. Then the White House walks back the remarks saying the president's point was that Putin cannot be allowed to exercise. We're in an environment now where I can't even tell, am I supposed to listen to what the president says to understand what the U.S. is doing? Am I supposed to listen to their Twitter feed? Am I supposed to listen to Jen Psaki or when Anthony Blinken comes on? It's not a good situation for the stewardship of the world's reserve currency. And I guess, at least for me, one of the things that helps is that, silver, certainly if you are able to have a longer time horizon, I'm 43 now. I don't have children at this point, but I mean, going back to what you said earlier, all right, if I want to just make life somewhat simple, not always be trying to trade and stare at a computer screen, go out, live life, and just at these levels, silver makes the most sense to me. And hey, if it takes 10 or 20 years before I'm passing it off to someone, my guess is a lot sooner than later that will be reflected in a way that I think a lot of silver investors are waiting for. But is that a good way of looking at things?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's how I think about it as well. Another way to look at it is, would you rather hold cash or silver? Or would you rather have cash or gold? And what I think most of us who are part of this market, I think we're aligned on that thinking. So I think you're right there. I mean, for me, obviously, I'm in the silver exploration, and the way I think about it too is these former producing mines were left there many times in production by the Spanish, let's say in the 1900s. When they didn't have the technology to really go much deeper than a few, like say tops 100 meters. And then, we have those available, we can apply new technology and make new discoveries. And as you were mentioning about Peter McGaw and how he has been one of my mentors. And, one of the main things that he has taught me is to really focus on finding, high grade silver that will make money under any market condition, and then projects that have the possibility to be a multi-generational line. So, that's where I personally have chosen, my efforts on looking at, silver on the ground. That's it's been discovered by the people back in the day, but it has not been able to be in, it still has the opportunity to be grown into a significant resource using modern technology. So, that's at the moment that's where I have most of my net worth is physical silver and shares of mining companies, gold, copper, and I'm not necessarily saying that's the right thing for everybody. I'm obviously not a U.S. citizen, so and I don't live in the U.S., so it's under a different sort of set of circumstances than your listeners, but it is a very definitely a market that's worth, I think, for everybody to take a look at.
Well, obviously I'm a little bit biased and not legal licensed financial advice yet. I guess, after leaving the trading floor, thinking, you know, and starting the channel with the intention of, all right, how would I explain this to my mom or someone who's, you know, maybe not as advanced? You know, if the old ways you thought of saving money in the bank, or I remember when I was little, sometimes we would get a treasury bond, and then when there was still interest, at some point it would get, you know, it'd be worth more. But if you wanted to leave something for the next 20 or 30 years in a set it and forget it type mentality, at least this is what I'm doing. And nice, one of the things we have in common, that what you're doing as well. And Jorge, I know you are expecting some news in the next week or so. So perhaps, I don't know if there's any bit you can share now, or just if you want to let folks know how they can stay posted. I know we do have a lot of Reyna Silver fans. A lot of the analysts I have on the show speak quite fondly of what you guys are doing with your project. So anything you could mention there, or how people can be aware when the news is released?
No, absolutely. I would ask everybody to please stay tuned. You know, we have completed the stage 2 of Gigi, and we're you know, just in the process of processing all the results. And then the same for Batopilas. We've you know, the next batch is ready. So now I'm just going through, you know, all the formalities. One thing that we had to do at Batopilas, we had to send some assays to be reassayed, and but that process is concluded. And so please stay tuned. You know, for the next set of news releases for both Gigi and Batopilas. And just for those of you who are new to Reyna Silver, we're exploring 3 historic districts. Gigi and Batopilas in Mexico are the ones that we've been drilling now. Batopilas, of course, a historic mine, the highest grade silver mine in the history of Mexico. And then Gigi, an extension to the biggest silver district. So really focus on silver grade that's high, and, you know, looking for big deposits with Peter McGaw, who's, as Chris mentioned, one of the most successful silver exploration geologists in the last 20, 30 years.
Well, and hopefully we'll have Peter back on the show soon. That was a lot of fun the last time we did that. And I know, especially for some of our silver mining nerds, we're really excited to hear from Peter and his knowledge. I might add any of those things. If you click up here on newsletter, you can get access to news from Reyna Silver, so you can get those releases. Jorge, we're also going to record some videos as your news comes out. So people who are subscribed to the Arcadia YouTube channel will be able to receive that as well. And with that said, Jorge, I thank you again for joining me. Thank you for your presence in the silver world. If only we had you as president of the U.S. or the globe, maybe the economy would run better. But thank you for doing your part and what you can. And we'll be looking forward to the news early next week or whenever it's finally released.
Thank you, Chris. Great speaking with you, and great speaking to everyone. And you know, I always like to offer anybody who would like. We have a great book about the history of our Batopilas project. The book is called The Silver Magnet, and it's an account of an American entrepreneur who goes to Mexico in the late 1800s and turns, you know, this place where, you know, historically they had pulled out, you know, these crazy pieces of solid silver. And then he turned it into the first modern mine in Mexico in the late 1800s. It was a listed company in the New York Stock Exchange. And that's the project that we're exploring. And you know, it's never been explored with modern technology until we came along. And anyway, it's a great book. And if anybody would like a copy, you know, feel free to write to me. You can write me at Jorge. You can see, I think, my name on the screen, JORGE @reynasilver.com. Or you can also write at info@reynasilver. That also forwards to my email. And I'll make sure to send, just give me your name and your address, and I'll send you a copy.
And I can confirm that because I got my copy. I finally finished reading it a couple of months ago. And I think one of the things it really pointed out is that it's like, I get it. People hear us talking about, well, it's not getting easier for the silver supply. You know, these guys like silver, you know, are they just saying that? Although it's like kind of showed in perspective that it's not the easiest thing. There's a reason not a lot of people are doing that. So I found that helpful, and appreciate you sending that. Also thought it was interesting that the section towards the end where they mentioned they were chasing people around trying to vaccinate them back then in the a couple hundred years ago.
Yeah.
So just interesting always to see how life goes in different places, especially while I've been in Mexico. So thank you. And folks, if you want to get a copy of The Silver Magnet, kind of a cool book to read. You think of the subconscious impact of that, you know, and then you can watch some Arcadia. You're from mi amigo Jorge Ramiro Monroy of Reyna Silver. Jorge, thank you as always, and we'll look forward to the news that's coming up with Reyna Silver.
Thank you.